Welcome to the Transportation and Maritime Security Subcommittee's hearing entitled Taking to the Skies, Examining TSA's Strategy for Addressing Increased Summer Travel. Thank you to Ranking Member Jimenez and our panel witnesses for joining us. As rates of vaccination against COVID-19 increase across the country, a growing number of travelers are taking to the skies once more. The numbers are striking. Indeed, on the first day of this month, TSA screened more people in a day than it did on the same day in 2019, before the pandemic. And the daily number of travelers screened at TSA checkpoints crossed the 2 million threshold multiple times in June. This is leading to fuller flights, longer lines at airports, and it seems higher tensions as passengers reacquaint themselves with the old and the new rules of flying. Today, we will hear from our witnesses about how TSA is managing this increase in summer travel, as well as crucial information about TSA's role in addressing incidents of unruly passenger behavior at checkpoints and in the air. As travel increases, our witnesses will share what efforts TSA is undertaking to recruit and retain more transportation security officers to ensure airports have adequate staffing. In addition, many of my colleagues and I are disturbed by the unacceptable rise in violence on planes and at airports that we have seen in the news. As chair of this subcommittee, I am particularly perturbed by the number of violent assaults against our TSOs in recent months. More than 70 TSOs have been assaulted since the start of the pandemic. These hardworking men and women, they've been on the front lines throughout the pandemic and simply should not have to endure this kind of a treatment. Another alarming trend we are seeing is the uptick in firearms, most of them loaded, that have been found in passengers' carry-on bags. According to TSA, 2,800 firearms have been caught at checkpoints so far this year. I am hopeful that our witnesses will share their perspectives on these encounters and what can be done to prevent them. While the pace of recovery in air travel is encouraging, we must not forget that the coronavirus, and particularly the dangerous Delta variant, is still at large. The mask mandate aboard planes and in airports remains in place until September 13th, and now is not the time to let our foot off the gas in terms of doing all that we can to prevent the virus's spread. As more travelers take to the air, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about TSA's strategy thus far and its future plans. Thank you. Now, the chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Watson-Coleman. I really appreciate that. I'm pleased that the subcommittee is holding this hearing today to discuss how TSA is securing the traveling public in our nation's airports as air travel begins to recover. As we emerge from the pandemic's devastating toll on air travel and the transportation sector, Americans are increasingly ready to return to travel to conduct the business, enjoy vacations, and visit family. I was pleased to see that TSA screened over 2.2 million passengers on Sunday, which is the highest level of air travel volume since March of 2020. In addition, there have been 10 days already this month of over 2 million daily travelers. On my way to DC from Miami yesterday, I saw this increased passenger volume firsthand. The lines for security were the longest that I have ever seen there at Miami International Airport. And the line for TSA pre-check was nearly 50 yards long from front to back. Again, that's the longest line I've ever seen on TSA pre-check. And what I'm understanding is that, at least at MIA, they're back to almost 95% of air travelers. And it's a huge international hub, and international business is way down. So once international travel starts to pick up again, we may actually surpass pre-pandemic levels. We must ensure our security checkpoints are properly staffed for the number of travelers that they're seeing. This issue must be addressed quickly to meet the growing demand on air travel. I am heartened that leisure air travel has recovered to 75% around the country to pre-pandemic levels, but TSA needs to be ready for an increase in business travel this fall, as well as projected increases in international travel. I remain concerned that staffing shortages at our nation's airports checkpoints will continue to grow as passenger volumes increase. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses about TSA's efforts to hire additional screeners for summer travel. I believe that an obstacle to recruiting and retaining TSA officers is that they need to be paid more. Increasing TSO pay is important to maintain a strong frontline workforce and to secure the traveling public. As passenger volumes continues to increase this summer and into the fall, it is incumbent upon TSA to facilitate the higher travel volume in an efficient and a very secure manner. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Members are also reminded that the subcommittee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and the ranking member in their February 3rd colloquy regarding remote procedures. The chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Watson Coleman. Thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. For much of last year, the skies were empty. Vaccines were a distant dream, and at one point, it seemed airlines were on the brink of collapse. At the beginning of lockdown, there were days where TSA screened less than 100,000 passengers. In contrast, this month, TSA routinely screens over 2 million passengers annually. But unfortunately, our nation's returns to travel has not gone seamlessly. Long lines have returned at checkpoints, meaning TSA has had to fight for more talent in this competitive job market. That fight for talent is hindered by the fact that TSA workers still do not receive the pay and protections afforded to other federal workers, though I'm glad to be working with the Biden administration to fix that problem. TSOs work hard under normal conditions, but the combination of COVID-19 and a dramatic uptick in unruly passengers has made the job even more challenging. Across the country, dozens of TSOs have been physically assaulted in recent months. Passengers have pushed and shoved officers, and in some cases, passengers have literally bitten TSOs. Not only that, but the rate of firearms found at TSA's checkpoint doubled last year. Consistently, over 80% of firearms, as already been said by the chairwoman, have been found to be loaded. Passengers must leave their firearms at home or follow the proper procedures for checking them, as bringing them to the checkpoint creates disruptions that could prove dangerous. Needless to say, this is a concerning convergence of trends. There have been a significant spike also in disrupted passengers in the sky, as flight attendants have been assaulted or harassed with regularity. All too often, these assaults occur simply because a crew member was doing their job and seeking to enforce common sense mask policies designed to protect flyers from COVID-19. Although the public is most familiar with TSA's on the ground responsibilities, federal air marshals play an essential role in aviation security once passengers get on board. We must ensure flight crews have the training and federal support they need to confront this uptick in assaults. It's imperative that the entire TSA enterprise has a strategy for addressing the challenges by increased travel and unruly passengers. Thank you again to our witnesses, and I appreciate your efforts to protect the traveling public and look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now welcome our panel of witnesses today. Mr. Darby LaJoy is the Executive Assistant Administrator for Security Operations at the Transportation Security Administration. after recently returning from a stint as acting TSA administrator. In his current role, he oversees checkpoint and baggage screening operations impacting millions of passengers at approximately 440 airports every day. Oversight of more than 280 international airports conducting last points of departure operations to and from the United States, and a surface network that encompasses freight, railroad, passenger rail, mass transit, maritime, and pipelines. Mr. Michael Anderson is the Executive Assistant Administrator of Law Enforcement and the Federal Air Marshal Service at the TSA. In his role, he oversees the deployment of federal air marshals on U.S. aircraft worldwide, as well as protection, response, detection, and assessment activities in airports and other transportation systems. Without objection, the witness's full statements will be inserted into the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his statements for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. LaJoy.
Good morning, Chairwoman Watson-Coleman, Ranking Member Jimenez, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the Transportation Security Administration's operations and strategy for addressing increased summer travel. Like all of us, TSA faced tremendous challenges for the past nearly 18 months from this ongoing global pandemic. When air travel came to a near standstill, our operational agility, the resilience of our workforce, and the strength of our partnerships were tested like never before. I am incredibly proud of the way we've adapted to these unprecedented challenges and positioned our agency to support what has been an historical recovery in passenger demand. Through the darkest times of the pandemic, we never wavered from our solemn commitment of protecting the nation's transportation systems and ensuring the freedom of movement of people and commerce. From the very beginning, TSA placed the highest priority on the health and safety of our employees and that of the traveling public. We moved quickly to implement protective measures at security checkpoints and screening locations across the country. We enforced social distancing at our checkpoints, installed acrylic shielding to minimize personal contact, increased sanitization efforts, and required officers to wear face masks, gloves, eye protection, and face shields. We used our personnel flexibilities to offer new leave options for employees at higher risk of severe illness from exposure to the virus, and maximize telework and flexible scheduling options whenever possible. And we are at the forefront in providing accelerated vaccine access through the department's operation Vaccinate Our Workforce. We took direct and meaningful action to supplement the worldwide pandemic response. We helped repatriate over 100,000 American citizens stranded across 136 countries, and facilitated the distribution of personal protective equipment and other critical supplies, such as ventilators, to countries around the world. Before I continue, I want to take a moment to thank our workforce, our TSA officers, our coordination center officers, our federal air marshals, our K-9 teams, our aviation, surface, cargo inspectors, our vetting personnel, and all the staff that stands behind them. To every single person who stood firm and fulfilled their duty, I am proud of their continued resilience and professionalism. Airport passenger volumes are finally nearing and consistently exceeding pre-pandemic levels. We anticipated this increase and began a concerted recruitment effort this past winter to hire the support needed to handle these increasing volumes throughout the remainder of the year. We also took additional measures such as doubling the size of our national deployment force to provide resources where needed. TSA is also utilizing several monetary incentives to recruit new employees and retain our valued workforce to ensure that adequate staffing levels continue. These efforts are already paying dividends. Sunday, July 18th was one of the busiest air travel days of 2021, with TSA screening over 2.24 million passengers. Over the entire 4th of July holiday period, July 1st through the July 7th, TSA screened almost 14 million passengers, with 97% waiting less than 20 minutes in standard lanes and less than 5 minutes in TSA pre-check lanes. More importantly, there were no major security incidents impacting the transportation sector. We are confident that TSA is prepared and well-positioned to continue to effectively meet increasing passenger volumes throughout the remainder of the summer. Unfortunately, with the increase in passenger volumes, TSA has also seen an increase in unruly passengers at TSA checkpoints across the country and onboard aircraft. Since the beginning of the pandemic, there have been over 85 physical assaults on TSA officers. Additionally, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of incidents on board aircraft, with over 3,600 in-flight disturbances since the beginning of the pandemic. Sadly, many of these disturbances have become violent, resulting in assaults against fellow passengers and flight crew. Our industry partners have reported an increase in assaults in other modes of transportation as well. And I want to thank those frontline transportation workers, including flight crew, who do their jobs every single day to make sure that the traveling public is safe. Additionally, and as noted by the members, TSA continues to detect firearms on passengers and in carry-on bags at checkpoints at an alarming rate. As of early July, TSA detected 2,807 firearms in 2021, 85% of which were loaded. In 2020, TSA officers discovered a total of 3,257 firearms on passengers or in their carry-on bags at checkpoints. To increase awareness of the requirements for properly transporting firearms, TSA has enhanced communication and outreach efforts with the public and stakeholders. And in February of this year, we published updated enforcement sanction guidance, which increased civil penalty ranges that TSA can impose. For first-time violations, TSA may impose a fine of up to $10,000 if the firearm is loaded. Air travelers coming to checkpoints for the first time since before the pandemic may see some changes in the security technology they encounter. Throughout the pandemic, TSA has worked to accelerate deployment of state-of-the-art technology such as computer tomography, credential authentication technology, and on-person screening enhancements.
Mr. LaJoy, excuse me, you've gone beyond your 5 minutes. Could you just sort of wrap it up and perhaps we can get to some of this with the questions?
Yes, ma'am. Let me just end by thanking you all for the opportunity today, and I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Mr. LaJoy. I'm certain that we'll get to some of that additional information in questions because you were heading into an area that we're very interested in. And thank you for that. I now recognize Mr. Anderson to summarize his statement for 5 minutes. Mr. Anderson?
Yes, good morning, Chairwoman Watson-Coleman, Ranking Member Jimenez, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify before you today to discuss the Transportation Administration's Law Enforcement Federal Air Marshal Services approach in securing aviation travel, which continues to increase from very low levels at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. The dedication and commitment of our federal air marshals to ensuring the safety and security of our nation's transportation system and its travelers is unwavering. Federal air marshals have played critical roles in the investigation and apprehension of suspects in the aviation domain, the protection of passengers and crew members, and the security of transportation hubs deterring terrorism. Throughout the unprecedented circumstances of the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic, our workforce steadfastly maintained the TSA mission in securing the nation's transportation system, and more specifically, we remain focused on the highest risk to transportation. To maintain operations, the deployment of federal air marshals during this time proved challenging, but the safety of our federal air marshals was not overlooked or minimized for the sake of the mission. Our workforce is our greatest asset, and their health and wellness is vital to mission success. In a few weeks, we will mark 20 years since September 11th, when terrorists evaded security of the nation's transportation system to kill thousands of people and inflict unmanageable damage. Today, TSA is postured to mitigate threats not only to aviation travel, but all modes of transportation with numerous layers of security. Two of these vital layers are our federal air marshals who deploy on missions aboard aircraft globally and throughout the many hundreds of transportation venues within the United States, and our federal flight deck officers who pilot thousands of aircraft prepared to protect the last threshold. The unique enclosed environment of an aircraft creates a challenging workspace for federal air marshals, but they are highly skilled and trained to deal with a wide variety of situations, whether aboard an aircraft or in the general environment. The ability to rapidly deploy in order to respond and address worldwide threats, risks, and natural disasters has long been a capability of TSA's law enforcement federal air marshal service. Federal air marshals have aided in rescue and security efforts stretching from New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina, the massive floods in Bismarck, North Dakota, the evacuation of expatriates from Lebanon in 2007, and with the first wave of COVID-19 to hit the U.S. shores early 2020, our federal air marshals assisted in the initial quarantine effort of those returning to the country on cruise ships. The volunteer force of federal flight deck officers is composed of dedicated commercial airline pilots who not only pilot, but are armed to defend the flight deck at all costs. These men and women are trained at the federal law enforcement training centers with the necessary skills to stop a threat to the aircraft's controls. Their selfless service aligns with TSA's commitment to aviation security, and their presence ensures the security for thousands of flights. Visible intermodal prevention and response teams, commonly known as Viper teams, continue to aid local, state, and security stakeholders by providing federal law enforcement support at transportation venues nationwide. Here again, our federal air marshals provide the unique skills and lend their experience within the transportation sector to our industry partners and fellow law enforcement agencies. I want to personally thank our federal air marshals, federal flight deck officers, and our transportation security officers, and the hundreds of mission support personnel for their service in securing our nation's transportation system. I appreciate the subcommittee's continued support of TSA and its mission. Thank you for this opportunity today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Both of you recognize that every member of our committee is interested in the safety and security of our TSA employees on the ground and our air marshals and all passengers in the air. So we're going to have a series of questions that are trying to direct your attention and ask for some specific responses to those. And I'm going to recognize myself first for questions. I'm very concerned about the reports of some 85 assaults against TSA officers since the start of the pandemic. I'm interested in understanding what conditions and situations have preceded these assaults. And are these incidences, are they connected with frustration about the mask mandate or procedures and wait times, or is it alcohol consumption? Mr. LaJoy, I'd like to start with you. If you could respond to that sort of briefly. I think you have to unmute. Mr. Anderson wouldn't have. While we're trying to connect you, we may have a problem connecting with you too, Mr. Anderson. I'm going to ask about the federal air marshals here. I do recognize that TSA employs a number of air marshals, and that the exact number is a sensitive security information issue that can't be discussed in this forum. But speaking generally, given the recent increases in disturbances on flights, do you have a need for more air marshals? And is the current rate at which the FAMs are on board and able to respond to these incidences sufficient? Mr. LaJoy and Mr. Anderson, could you just nod if you're hearing me? There's no connectivity.
I'm hearing you very well, Madam Chair, so it must be on their end.
Yeah.
I hear you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Jimenez and Chairman Thompson, we're going to take a pause here and see if we can straighten this out. So we will be in recess until we can connect again to our witnesses. Stop my video. Huh? Let me gavel us back in session. We are now back in session. Thank you. As I was saying, I'm particularly concerned with the reports of 85 assaults against TSA officers since the start of this pandemic. I would like to have your response to these questions. What conditions and situations preceded these events, these assaults? Are incidences connected with frustration about the mask mandate, frustration with screening procedures, and wait times or alcohol consumption? Mr. LaJoy.
Well, thanks for that question, Madam Chair. I think it's fair to say that all of those conditions is something that we're experiencing. And we just sadly had 2 assaults yesterday coming through one of our checkpoints. There has been some frustration over the mask mandate that's been widely reported, but we're also seeing a number of these, whether it's on our checkpoints or in the air, they're alcohol related. So I think, our best judgment would dictate that all of these are having some type of an impact on what we're seeing transpire at our checkpoints and on board the aircraft.
So if you are observing passengers or potential passengers that are exhibiting these kinds of behaviors, exactly what do you all do in terms of whether or not they're allowed to get on the plane?
But, well, Madam Chair, so for anybody at our checkpoint who's exhibiting those types of behaviors, we immediately have law enforcement respond, and we've had tremendous support from our airport law enforcement partners. A number of these assaults are resulting in an arrest, and so they never get through our checkpoints, and they never get on board the aircraft. And so if we have a clear indication that at our checkpoint, somebody is already exhibiting violent behavior, we will notify law enforcement and they will not proceed through the checkpoint. Ultimately, they will not board the aircraft.
I would think that your response to assaults upon the TSOs is very very severe. Could you give me some indication about have individuals been fined? Have they been charged for assaulting these officers? What sort of penalties do they face? And in general, are you keeping a log or record of incidences at the checkpoints with regard to people that you've had to remove, how many, what for, and what happened to them?
Yes, ma'am. So, I mean, every one of these, so every assault on a TSO, we immediately investigate. So they are subject to a civil penalty up to almost $15,000 if it results in a physical assault. In addition, if they are a member of a TSA pre-check, it could result in a temporary on up to a permanent ban from TSA pre-check, depending on the severity. As I stated before, a number of these are resulting in local charges from law enforcement. And in additional, we've had tremendous support from U.S. attorneys around the country in bringing federal criminal charges, both in cases against our officers or against members of the flight crew. So it's both federal and local criminal charges in addition to civil penalty up to $15,000 and potentially a permanent ban of TSA pre-check.
Can you provide us with the information as to how many people have been fined, how many people have been arrested?
We can certainly provide that back for the record. You know, we'll go back to the beginning of the pandemic since we've been charting this, and we'll provide that back.
Thank you very much. A quick question before my time is up to you, Mr. Anderson. I know I recognize the number of federal air marshals that you all employ as sort of sensitive security information that can't be discussed in a forum of this nature. But given the recent increases in disturbances, do you have enough air marshals? And is the current rate at which federal air marshals are on board and able to respond to these incidences that have been demonstrated and verified sufficient?
Yes, Madam Chair. At this point in time, I do have enough federal air marshals to cover our mission. And our mission hasn't really changed since prior, to COVID-19. Our federal air marshals are still out providing, in-flight security. As far as the amount of federal air marshals over the next few years, I may need some support in hiring due to attrition, as a large portion of our workforce entered on service right after 9/11, and will be coming up to their, up to their 20th year anniversary. But at this point in time, I'm confident that I do have enough federal air marshals.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. My time has expired, but I do have a second round of questions regarding air marshals and their well-being and the type of scheduling that takes place. But now I'd like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I appreciate that. Mr. LaJoy, what happens to passengers that are carrying firearms either in their person or in their carry-on bags?
So immediately when TSA detects the firearm on the X-ray, we will notify law enforcement. Everything stops because, to the point we were raising earlier, this very much is a public safety concern for our checkpoints. I mean, 85% of the weapons that we encounter are loaded, oftentimes haphazardly thrown in a bag. And so our first priority is to stop and allow law enforcement to take control of that situation. And then depending on what the various state and local laws may be, law enforcement will take it for action. It could be anything from an arrest. It could be, placing the weapon in a safe location, allowing the passenger to return it in some case. But the very first instance for TSA is to notify state and local law enforcement to take control of that situation.
There's no federal law prohibiting somebody transporting a firearm, trying to get a firearm onto an airplane?
There's certainly a number of civil statutes that would prohibit somebody from bringing a weapon on board the aircraft. And so immediately following the law enforcement actions, TSA investigates every one of these circumstances for a civil penalty.
Not a criminal penalty. And I understand that some people may inadvertently leave a firearm in a carry-on, et cetera, and I understand that, okay? But there's the civil penalty, it's not a criminal penalty to do that?
Well, I think each one of these are going to depend on the circumstances. We'd have to defer to DOJ on that. But I think one of the challenges is that the intent element is not something that's in a federal criminal statute. So it really depends on what, if any, aggravating circumstances may be present if the gun was stolen, or depending on the particular circumstances, we do get support from U.S. attorneys, but it's very much dependent on the individual circumstances of the case.
All right, now some of them are on carry-on. Some of them are actually, you find them on the person, right?
That is correct. We have had circumstances where we found them on the purse. I mean, the predominance of these things are, in a bag, and the most often cited reason is they simply forgot it was in there. But we have had circumstances when we've discovered these things on their person.
Would you say that the majority of those that have the gun on them have some kind of concealed weapons permit? And they just think that it's okay because they have concealed weapons permit?
I think that's certainly something that we encounter, sir. I mean, again, depending on the different state, when we find, obviously, thousands of weapons a year. So we can go back and see if we know how many of those cases those individuals have a concealed carry permit. But to your point, I think the way we focus on this is twofold. We prioritize the enforcement actions. So we've actually added 6 aggravating factors to a weapon. If it's loaded, if there's a round that's chambered, if they're a member of TSA trusted traveler programs or an employee of transportation, that's considered an aggravating factor. But again, the most often cited reason is they simply forgot it's in there. So we actually developed a pamphlet that we issued in the spring and summer to get word out for how people can properly transport weapons if they travel.
And what happens to somebody who's tries to do this 2 times, twice? Do you have a database of people that you've seen trying to get through TSA with a firearm and then somehow try to do it again?
We do. Now, our numbers are the number of repeat offenders is about 6%. And it's about a handful of those who repeat it, beyond 2 times. And then, frankly, the penalties get quite severe for repeat offenders. That really is at the maximum civil penalties, and a number of these things at that point, depending on the circumstances, may result in criminal penalties as well, whether state or local. But we do have that information. So,
again, I don't know if you answered the question or not. Is it a federal crime to try to bring a firearm onto an airplane?
Depending on the circumstances, it may. But the thing that's lacking in the federal criminal statute, and again, I have to defer to counsel, is the element of intent. So what we often hear is our experience is generally on the circumstances themselves may or may not result in a federal charge.
Okay. Did you guys change policy at all? Anything happened differently on Monday than started something on Monday because of what I saw personally was unbelievably long lines at TSA. Did you guys change something, or it was just a really heavy travel?
We've not changed any policies, or I think to what you're recognizing is we are seeing exceedingly increasing numbers of passenger volume. Just last week, 117 airports are already exceeding what their volume is in 2019, which is sort of pre-pandemic. It's how we measure things. What our experience every single day is when we have these wait times, every one of our lanes is open. So it's generally capacity constraints in the system, or sometimes equipment could break. But our federal security directors are getting their lanes open.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you to the ranking member. Your time has expired. Chair now recognizes the chairman, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me thank the witnesses for their testimony. Mr. LaJoy, are you satisfied that with the present uptick in travel, that TSA will be able to accommodate the manpower requirements going forward to address this?
I am, Mr. Chairman. So year to date, we've hired about 4,700 officers. just the last 2 weeks, we track it every 2 weeks. We brought on almost 500 officers, and we are on pace to meet the 6,000 number that we know we needed through the summer. But again, I do recognize that we're facing the same challenges that many are in competing, for talent. And so it's really been a focus of ours, because while I'm confident we have plans in place for the summer, I also recognize that as we get closer to the fall and winter, as business travel continues, as well as international travel picks up, we're going to have to continue to look at our requirements, working with the airlines to make sure that we, into the fall and winter, continue to have adequate resources in our airports.
So as you compete for talent, do you make some analysis of why TSOs leave TSA?
We do, Mr. Chairman, and consistently what our internal, FEV scores show us that our officers are very dedicated to the mission, but they leave because of pay. And at this point, there's simply so many other organizations that would love to have, TSA employees work for them. The most common reason that we find is they're leaving because of inadequate pay.
Well, there are a lot of us who have advocated from the beginning to treat TSOs just like we do the majority of other federal employees. So if we are in effect losing good people because of pay, why either as administrator or secretary won't we fix this? What is the problem with the fix?
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, we're certainly aware of your concerns in this area, and Secretary Mayorkas, this has been a priority for the Secretary since he came into office, and it's been a priority for Administrator Pekoski for the last 4 years. The Secretary has directed us to provide back to him a specific plan that addresses the structural problems with TSO pay, in addition to some of the rights with collective bargaining and grievance procedures. So we owe that plan back to the Secretary. Be happy to provide a briefing back, once that plan is complete.
So when is it supposed to be back to the Secretary or complete?
We owe it to the department, sir, the beginning of September. I can get the exact date back on the record.
Well, my concern is if we losing good people and it's a matter of pay, and we don't pay people commensurate like with other federal employees, if there's some authorities you lack, if whatever it is, from what I hear from everyone who's been on the call on this hearing so far, they want to fix it. And so if there are problems, just give us the impediments, and I think we'll go forward. Because most of us go through airports every week, and the number one issue we hear from those TSOs is, I like my job, but as soon as I get my time in, I'm gonna transfer because I can't support my family. So thank you very much. The other question I have is reference fellow air marshals. So Mr. Odison, do federal air marshals currently have all the necessary authorities to address any and all issues around airline or passenger security in the air?
Yes, sir, we do. Federal air marshals have authority under ATSR and Title 49. They would have the same authorities as any other federal law enforcement officer, in the government. But we have the appropriate authorities to conduct our mission, sir.
So, thank you. So if an issue around a passenger having an issue with one of the employees on the plane in the air, that marshal has the authority to intercede.
Yes, sir. If a crime is committed on board an aircraft by a passenger, our federal air marshals do have the authority to enforce the law and make an arrest.
So that's if it's an issue around a mask, or if it's any other issue. I don't want to split hairs with crime, but if if this passenger was just being totally unresponsive to the directions of the staff, that air marshal under current authority can intercede.
The gentleman's time has expired, but we're going to allow you to answer that question, please, as expeditiously as possible. Thank you.
Sure, sir. Flight attendants, sir, are trained, and we offer crew member self-defense. They are trained to handle most minor offenses. If a non-compliance with a mask turns into an assault or turns into a crime on board the aircraft, our federal air marshals are trained to take appropriate response.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for being so gracious with your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Lovejoy, the chairman is absolutely right about the level of pay being an incentive to stay or go, but it's even just more than just the pay you pay them. It is the predictability of the regular increases, and it is the other pension and benefits that are accorded those individuals that are under Title V, and we're very interested in ensuring equality and under this opportunity. The chair now yields to the gentlelady from Iowa, Ms. Miller-Meeks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank our gentlemen for their testimonies. I'll pontificate a little bit as well. Members of Congress travel a lot. That's no surprise. I go back to my district in Iowa every opportunity that I have. I find that it keeps me humble, and also my constituents bring up things to me that end up becoming resolutions or letters or laws. Most recently when I travel, I go through a lot of airports that I'm not sure what you would consider their size, in towns of 200,000 to 300,000 people. In the past 2 airports I've gone through, the TSA pre-check line has not been utilized. We've all been funneled through the same line and then diverted out of the body scanner to the regular metal detector. But my point in that is that I counted over 12 people going through one line and other people standing around not doing anything. So that leads into my question. So I just want to point out that in several airports, I have seen a lot of personnel who are not actively engaged in screening individuals. They may be actively engaged in other things. So I think understanding from your written testimony that we expected the checkpoints over the July 4th holiday travel period not to have significant delays. But I'm also learning from airports that some had significant longer delays than other airports. And does TSA track in real time the wait times at all airports based on Congress's definition of the TSA Modernization Act of 2018? And who guides in an individual airport how people are assigned?
So thank you for the question, ma'am. So the answer is yes, we do track wait times across all of our airports, which is how we're able to articulate, what our averages are. And we also track the number of what we would call excessive wait times. And hopefully the point I made in my earlier comments is that, for us, we are very focused on making sure that we have all of our lanes open. And what our experience generally is today is that we are having long wait times, but every single one of our lanes is open. That tells us we have adequate staffing in place, and it is simply a capacity constraint of an airport. This is very common, especially now, because most of the volume we're seeing is domestic travel. So a lot of these relatively small airports with 1 or 2 or a handful of lanes, every lane is open early, and we are still having these wait times. And on the ground, our federal security directors around the country are ultimately responsible for working with their airport and their airlines to make sure that we understand what the schedules are going to be and we have adequate staffing in place.
Interesting. It hasn't been my experience through these. Again, I'm not sure what size airports you would consider them to be in towns of 200,000 or 300,000 people if that's a small airport. Which leads to my next question. Increasing the number of passengers enrolled in TSA PreCheck would supposedly better enable TSA to utilize its screening resources as travel volume continues to recover. And I think for those of us that fly, we have absolutely seen travel volume increase dramatically. Mr. LaJoy, is TSA promoting enrollment in TSA PreCheck in smaller leisure markets that are experiencing extended wait times? Or, are you wanting people to do both clear and TSA PreCheck depending upon their level of travel?
Yeah, so yes, Congresswoman. So the short answer is, we are absolutely promoting TSA PreChecks. We've got over 400 enrollment centers around the country, and our pre-pandemic daily enrollments was about 10,000 people a day is what we were tracking. We're at about 98% of that now. And in fact, last month, June, was our busiest month for enrollments in the last 5 years. So we are, pleased with the progress that we're making. We still recognize there's a long way to go. But by the end of this year, we will have 3 enrollment providers for TSA PreCheck that can all focus on increasing enrollments. This remains a priority of ours, and we are starting to see PreCheck volume increase along with the general passenger increases we're seeing around our airports.
Great. Well, I really appreciate my TSA PreCheck and not having to take off my shoes. So thank you so much. And Madam Chairwoman, I yield back my time.
Thank you to the gentlelady. I now recognize Mr. Payne from New Jersey.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and once again, thank you for this timely hearing. Mr. Lovejoy, my colleagues, the overall chairman of the committee and the chairwoman of this subcommittee are truly diplomatic in their questioning with respect to TSO pay. I have not had as long a tenure as a legislator or a diplomat, so I'm going to get right to the crux of this. You talk about a 4-year lag in a report and the secretary wanting to do it. Why can't we do it? If we've known, I've been talking about the topic since the chairwoman has arrived here in Congress. She's talked about it. The chairman's been on the committee since it started. What is the holdup in bringing a commensurate salary to the job that's being done by TSOs, the front line of security in this country? It is common for the people doing the hardest work to be treated the worst. And I won't make any analogies, but can you answer what has to be done? What can we do in Congress to expedite this?
I think our experience, Congressman, and again, I appreciate your concern and as well as the committee on this issue. I can't underscore enough how much of a priority this is for both Secretary Mayorkas as well as Administrator Pekoski. And part of the work that we owe back to the Secretary is identifying the cost. The work we did in the last Congress on estimating some of the costs with this, and there was a lot of work that still has to go into understanding this, had across the FISA a cost of moving the TSA workforce into what would be comparable to Title V at around $3.8 billion. And so there's a lot of work, how we classify the positions. So there's a lot of work that has to go into understanding what those total costs would be. But generally, that has been the biggest obstacle to getting these things done over many, many years. And again, I'll applaud, the attention this is getting from both Administrator Pekoski and the Secretary. But at this point, I think with respect to TSO pay, understanding what those costs are, I think is going to be crucial in actually fixing what are the structural problems of addressing TSO pay today.
Well, I would think by this point in time that should fairly be resolved. If we're talking about 4 years, 5 years, I've been talking about it for 8 years. When do we get the results? When do we get to the end of it? But it really is very concerning to me that it feels like we're just kind of kicking the can down the road, and these frontline workers are not being compensated to the levels and the degree of the importance of their job. Would you consider TSA, uh, let's see, as you know, the Partnership for Public Service recently released rankings for the best places to work in the federal government for 2020. TSA ranked last in pay satisfaction, as we just discussed, near the bottom in its handling of COVID-19. And now TSOs are being assaulted at checkpoints across the country, as it was stated. Would you consider, would TSA consider conducting a weekly survey of how many TSOs have been verbally harassed by passengers? Though this may not rise to the level of physical violence, and the government must be mindful of First Amendment rights, there's no way that getting shouted at every day when your mission is to keep the flying public safe can be good for TSO morale.
Well, I think the short answer is, anything that we can do to better understand what is happening with our officers, I think we're in support of. As we talked earlier, we certainly have information on physical assaults, but I'll commit to working with the staff to see if there's a way in which we can do some type of survey to better understand, aside from physical assaults, what level of verbal abuse our officers are experiencing every day. So I'll commit to working with the staff and getting an answer back to you, Congressman.
Thank you, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much to the gentleman from New Jersey. I think we're going to engage in a short second round of questions. And I'll recognize myself first for these questions. Mr. Anderson, you had indicated that you would be seeking our help soon as it relates to, I guess, federal air marshals perhaps retiring or something because they've been there for a long period of time. When do you anticipate asking us for help, and what is that help? In what form is that help supposed to come to you or need to come to you?
Sure. Yeah, I think right now we're putting our first class of federal air marshals into training in September. We haven't hired since 2017 because, quite frankly, we really haven't had a need. Our numbers have been pretty solid. Our attrition rate has been pretty predictable. As we get into 23 and 24, I suspect a number of our federal air marshals will be nearing retirement. I don't know at what point how many of our federal air marshals will seek retirement, but I would seek your help down the road to ensure that we do have the ability to hire additional federal air marshals.
Thank you. Now, I recognize that federal air marshal's job in general has a bit of anxiety and is very stressful. But I'm very concerned about the reports of poor mental health among the FAM's workforce. Is the operational tempo currently expected of FAM's reasonable? What is TSA doing to support the mental and physical well-being of its air marshals?
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for your question. I do think that the operational tempo of our federal air marshal is probably the most moderate tempo that we have had since probably 2016 or 2017. We have put several scheduling guidelines in place to ensure that we're balancing the scheduling for our federal air marshals. We put a bunch of rule sets in place since I think 2018 or 2019 to make sure that we are utilizing our resources adequately, and now we're not putting an undue burden on our federal air marshals. So I feel confident that our scheduling, and I can't go over the actual numbers or the hours that our federal air marshals are flying at this point, Madam Chair, but it is significantly less than what it was, I would say, probably 3 to 4 years ago.
Okay. Can you speak to the second part of my question?
Yes, ma'am. As far as the mental health, obviously that is a significant concern, of mine. We have onboarded our psychologist. Dr. Tarbert started she onboarded on July 4th. I actually met her in Atlantic City while I was doing some interaction with our training center and our employees. Mm-hmm. She is excited to be on board. She is currently working with our medical program section, where she will review all of the records, our previous history what we have done in the past for mental illness, and she will develop a plan, moving forward. So she is on board, and we will utilize her resources both at the programmatical level, and I'd imagine we would use her at the field level as well.
Well, thank you. Mr. LaJoy, real quick question, follow up on the whole issue of the firearms and baggage. I understand that after the June 6th insurrection, that airlines in particular had made decisions regarding firearms in their checked baggage and things of that nature. I'm wondering, to what extent did the TSA engage in those discussions and offer guidance? And what, if any, authority do you think you need that you don't have right now to ban firearms and checked baggage?
Well, Madam Chair, we were certainly aware that the airlines were taking that, which was a policy position for them, but it was really, I'd have to defer to the FAA because that goes, the legal relationship that airlines and their passengers have go under the DOT and FAA authorities on the contract of carriage requirements. And so we were aware that they were doing it, but I'd have to defer to FAA for the legal relationship with how they did that.
So let me ask you about TSA, since you all the folks that keep people, bad passengers and bad things happening from getting on the plane. Do you think that you need more authority, a particular law or whatever, to give you the authority to ban these firearms from being in checked baggages?
Well, I think with respect to firearms and checked baggage, we actually have a pretty high level of compliance with that. And so our concern really is what is the prohibition is having the firearms in checked baggage and on their person where they have access to it. I mean, what our message is to get word out on how to properly travel with firearms that would require them to put them in their checked baggage, to properly declare it, make sure it's properly stored with the ammunition. And so our message is understand how to properly travel, which would be never in carry-on, never on your person, but properly doing so in your checked luggage.
One quick question. If you find an individual has a firearm on his person and that individual has ammunition, you refer that person to law enforcement, right?
It would be an immediate referral to law enforcement, ma'am. Immediate.
Does law enforcement remove that person from the line to get on the airplane?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, the very first actions law enforcement take, whether it's, and again, in the rare occasion it's on their person or in their accessible property, is to safely mitigate that. They remove it, they take it to a safe place in order to do what they do to make sure that the public is not at risk.
And is that person allowed on the plane?
It would depend on the state or local laws and the circumstances of the actual incident.
Thank you. I recognize Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no further questions at this time. Thank you. Back my time.
With your indulgence, Mr. Jimenez, I'd like to ask another question about individuals who are taken by law enforcement when they're found with loaded guns or even unloaded on their possession.
I would welcome that. Actually, that was my line of questioning to begin with. So.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, Mr. LaJoy, could you expound on that just a little bit more, because you keep saying that local law enforcement will mitigate it. I don't know what that really means in terms of what they will do.
So in the first instance, ma'am, our officers at the checkpoint are going to they're going to see the image of the firearm in the X-ray tunnel or the CT machine. Our procedures are they immediately stop, and they're going to notify law enforcement. So we won't take possession of that bag. Then local law enforcement will respond to the checkpoint, they'll identify who the passenger is. They will safely take control of the bag that has the weapon in it. Again, to your point, a lot of which are loaded, and they will take it away from the checkpoint to begin their investigation. Depending on what the state and local laws are, that might be a check to see if they are properly licensed to do it. In some cases where irrespective of license, it's illegal to have it, they may issue an arrest at that point, but it really does depend. After they immediately make sure there's no risk of safety or security at the checkpoint, it becomes whatever the local laws are going to dictate they would do at that point with respect to the individual and the weapon.
Does law enforcement separate the weapon from the ammunition, even if a person is licensed to have that weapon?
I think in a general sense, I'm confident in saying yes, ma'am, because again, their immediate actions to make sure there is no safety issue to the general public. And so one of the very first things they're going to do is ensure that weapon is in a safe manner so they can carry it away from the checkpoint.
Thank you very much. I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus. And Ms. Titus, I can give you a few more minutes and 5 because we've had first and second rounds here.
Well, thank you very much for indulging me to get here and for holding this hearing. Representing a city like Las Vegas, nothing could be more important than this. We know that a person's holiday begins when they land in the airport, so we want us to start with a positive experience. Mr. LaJoy, I would just tell you that I appreciate the TSA's staffing up and hiring more people to meet the summer demands, and it's coming fast. People have this pent-up desire to get out and go on holiday, and that we're certainly seeing that in Las Vegas. But the TSOs at McCarran are telling me that hiring's going slowly. I certainly support giving bonuses for hiring, but what about the morale of the people who are already there and have been doing the hard work? Is there any way to reward those good officers because they're experiencing burnout and now they see new people coming in with a bonus? What can we do to help those who have been there on the front lines through all of this?
Well, thank you, ma'am, for the question and for recognizing that. And so one of the things we've done, in addition to offering bonuses to attract new officers, we are giving existing officers a referral bonus if they have a friend who wants to work for TSA. We're also giving retention bonuses to our officers because we recognize that we are competing not only for new talent, but to keep the talent that we have. We've also increased the award allocations of our field leaders. And so this is certainly a priority for us. And in fact, we have an entire suite of incentives that we've offered for hard to hire airports that we can submit back. And it has sort of the breakdown airport by airport for what they qualify for and everything we've been doing over the last several months to make sure that we get new officers and we keep the great talent that we have.
Well, good. I am glad to hear that because they have definitely done the work and put themselves in danger to keep travelers and all of us safer. So we don't want to forget them as we try to expand. And speaking of putting in danger, I'd like to ask you some more about the vaccine program. I know that y'all did a vaccinate our workforce, which was great. What happened at McCarran was that many of the TSOs were worried about they got the vaccination, but their families didn't. And they live in multi-generational households, and that's especially true for Hispanic families. I wonder if there's any plan to encourage or to assist or to do yourselves some kind of program like that to help in those more hesitant communities and protect not just the worker, but their whole family.
Well, again, thanks for that question, ma'am, and to recognizing the importance of Operation Vaccinate Our Workforce. And so the TSA numbers presently, I have them as of about a week ago, about 63% of TSA employees have gotten their first shot, and about 45% are fully vaccinated. And our chief medical officer has really done an excellent job of making sure that location by location, if we have access to programs that can help vaccinate not only our officers, but also their families, that we're getting that word out. And again, I would applaud all of our federal security directors around the country because they have diligently, for a number of months now, making sure they had local information on to get out to their workforce. And so this remains a priority of ours. And you have my commitment. If there's something more we can and should be doing to get the word out, we will certainly do that.
Well, that's good. I hope you'll work with the unions then the different airports too, because, you know, sometimes people don't trust the government, but they trust somebody they know, whether it's a church or a family member or a union that they belong to. So I hope you'll work with them too. Speaking of the vaccination, since people are traveling, the rates are going up. Certainly in Las Vegas and Nevada, our rates are going up. Do y'all have any plans to monitor that or do anything special in those hot spots to protect your members?
Well, it's something, ma'am, to your point that we've monitored from the very beginning. I mean, we are starting to see these Delta variants. We're certainly, very concerned by what we're seeing. Our officers are still on the front line. And so the manner in which we were postured at the height of the pandemic with respect to taking measures to protect our workforce is exactly where we're committed today. Every single day, we get reports on the number of our employees who are contracting COVID-19. And as we start to see an increase in certain locations, we work very diligently to make sure that we're taking the proper steps to help protect our workforce. This remains a concern of ours, and we'll do so in the future. And again, it's why it's important for us to continue to work very closely with the CDC on this. At every level in the organization, we are very closely coordinating with them because we are relying on them to give us the very best information that they have available to them.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I look forward to working with you and TSA to be sure that our folks stay protected and our travelers. So thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I don't see that there are any more questions for you. Let me say thank you very much to both of you for your very valuable testimony and for, recognizing that we're very concerned and want to be very supportive of the needs of TSA and the air marshals and the officers that are on the front lines, because we do respect the fact that they've been there in the midst of all of this during the entire time. So please know that we want to make sure that Congress is doing everything it can to let them understand and appreciate that we appreciate them and support the things that they do. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for you. As a matter of fact, we did ask you for some information regarding incidences. We'd ask that you would respond expeditiously in writing to those questions. The chair reminds the members of the subcommittee that the committee's record will remain open for 10 days. Now, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you, ma'am.